anyway, so I go ahead. You were saying?
No, I was just going to introduce you to everybody. Hey, everybody, this is Dr. April Foreman. Hi, everyone. Hello.
How are you? I can only see the Zoom. I can't see the chat, but I'm going to count on you. And
yes.
Unless is there a place for me to sign in?
Yes.
So
I mean, if you just go to twitch.tv/Mxiety.
Sure, going to it right now.
Yeah, if you go there, that's where you'll see the chat. Don't forget to mute me, otherwise it's going to be like a weird 5-second delay echo. Tale of Grief. Hi, Doctor and Corgi Lady. Hi, Tale of Grief. My mic is peaking. Goddamn, I can't.
There's like a wonderful delay, but I think we're all muted.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's fantastic. I always watch the third episode for Hello, Doctor and Corgi Lady. I love it. Perfect. I'll go ahead to keep the just so that I don't have a lag in the feed, and also I'm in a hotel room and my my bandwidth is hotel.
But I'm really impressed. So far, so good. You're here.
I thank you so much. I did bring my tech guy, so I didn't bring him with me. Like, full disclosure. So totally the truth. I'm not name dropping, but I'm in Boston this week. Tomorrow, I'm going to be presenting, sort of emceeing a data science summit at Harvard with Dr. Matt Nock and with the Veterans Crisis Line, where I employed. I'm not speaking on their behalf. This is just me in my private time. But so I'm here, and it happens to be that the chair, the board chair of the American Association of Suicidology, my best friend Tony Wood, lives here in town. And so last night he texted me and he's like, "Are you going to be in Boston tomorrow? And you didn't tell me." And I was like, "Well, I'm going to be really busy. I have this live stream, and we're rolling out a new chat platform at 4:30 in the morning, and then I'm emceeing the summit all day."
Oh my gosh!
It's going to be really busy. And he was like, "Well, don't you have time for dinner?" And so he came and made sure it all worked.
Oh,
he's in the IT business. That's why he lives here, and he knows all these people, and so he totally set this up, and he adiosed.
Wow, that is so sweet. You got the best friends, man. That's amazing.
I don't hate it. I don't hate it. So I'll let you. It's probably top of the hour. I don't know if you have a way that you do your pacing on your shows.
No, the pacing is this. The fact that we're just chatting is great. And then we have questions that are going to come in from the audience once I open up the question queue, which
totally
is...
Audience, if there is anything about suicide that you ever wanted to know, including the weird stuff and the stuff that people will not tell you, I am that lady who will tell you the things. Because I have no reason not to, and happen to be have probably... This is an old school reference, but I happen to have one of the best Rolodexes in the field of suicidology, which we're going to talk about what that is. And I'm happy to talk with you about that stuff. I'm also really happy to talk about some of the freaky technology, social media stuff, dark web, some of the things. And we're going to be doing a wonderful Reddit AMA, on the 10th, in a week. So this is the preview to that. You guys get first crack at it.
That's really fancy, guys. This is feeling fancy. That's
pretty cool. To me, the front page AMA, which is super crazy.
That is really perfect. That's about gosh darn time that this gets the attention that it deserves. So yes.
Sure.
Yes.
So, do we want to do a warm-up question? Do we have
I'm gonna lean into questions. I just wanted to make sure you're coming. I'm letting you kind of take the lead. Awesome.
I had coffee.
Awesome.
I had a lobster roll.
You had a lobster roll. You are set then. You are totally Bostonified. Perfect. Amazing. Okay, so to start us off, the question is what the heck is suicidology?
So this is a question that I asked myself a few years ago, because so first of all, I'm Dr. April Foreman. I am a licensed psychologist. Many people know what that means. And so just so that you understand, sort of generally speaking, that means that I have a doctorate degree. And for me, I have a PhD, which I have to say, you could have a PsyD or a PhD, or, a couple, but I'm ooh, the PhD, because it's so hard, right? Whatever. And then I have a license on top of that, which licensed me to practice, not medicine, but obviously to practice in psychology. And you cannot use the word psychologist, because it is a controlled term. depending on the state that you're in, unless you like have a license and meet a bunch of criteria, right? So it's some gatekeeping. And then I was going about like practicing psychology, like being a clinician, and fell into the field of suicide prevention. And I had been hired several years ago by the Veterans Affairs by at a particular hospital to be the suicide prevention coordinator. I already had experience doing clinical work with folks at high risk for suicide. My clinical experience, there are folks very high risk, very disruptive behaviors, very painful for themselves and others to be around, specifically called borderline personality disorder. And I love helping people with that disorder. If you get good dialectical behavior therapy, you have an above 80% chance of being much better in a year. So it's like much more fixable.
In a year?
In a year.
We have quite a few people.
Dramatically better.
Wow. We have quite a few people in the community who have BPD and who are constantly struggling with where do I get the help that I need and how do I. So
super hard to get.
It is super hard to find appropriate help, and then people who won't discriminate against you. And there's a lot going against BPD. Yeah.
You are 100% correct. As a matter of fact, anywhere from 3 to 10% of people who have BPD are going to die by suicide. It's our highest mortality mental health disorder. Wow. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death, and BPD is a very serious risk factor for suicide. And so we know that folks who get this die. So think of it like I was a clinician that specialized in helping people with this disorder who have a very serious chance of dying by suicide. Very serious. Like if you went, my husband a couple of years ago was diagnosed with thyroid cancer, 100% 5-year survival rate. We took it so seriously. Imagine you get diagnosed with BPD. That's what your suicide mortality rate is. It's very, very serious. And so of course you want to do really great evidence-based therapy. I'm trained in dialectical behavior therapy. And I did that for many years until very recently with this job I've had for the last year. And I care very much about helping them. It's also the #1 disorder that clinicians discriminate against. Clinicians are half the problem for folks with BPD, and I'm super willing to say that. As a matter of fact, part of dialectical behavior therapy is owning that the system and that clinicians can do things that keep people from BPD from getting well. And so I just really, really cared a lot because getting trained in helping people recover was this magical moment for me. I'd showed up in rural Kansas, back near where I'm from, to be near my husband's family. And I had never intended to practice full-time clinically. And there were these folks with BPD, and they were like literally some of them like 10% of the revenue for the whole clinic across 4 counties, like one patient. And where we had been billing for taking care of them for years and years, they've been getting worse and worse. And it's morally wrong to take a lot of money and someone gets sicker and not give them the evidence-based therapy. This is how I get trained and how I end up doing this. So I have this wonderful experience as a clinician of seeing that how people get well and reducing people's risk of dying. And this just really transforms my understanding of what's happening in the world. So I come to be a suicide prevention coordinator. I'm going to run a DBT clinic. I'm going to only focus on folks with high risk for suicide in the small, like one hospital, like basically covered about 1/3 of the state of Louisiana, but like one hospital system, and really focus on the high risk care of about 100 patients, and maybe even directly clinically, maybe only 6 or 7 very high risk. So very focused care. And so I made friends with one of the clinicians there, Dr. Bill Schmitz. He was at that time newly minted president of the American Association of Suicidology. I'd never heard the term before. And he's like, "You're a suicidologist." And I'm like, what the, I'm like, don't invent words.
Right.
And he says, no, there's this guy. And they started calling it suicidology. And he started really talking about the idea that study of suicide is much like the study of cancer. You would study oncology, right? And there are different kinds of oncology that you would study, but you wouldn't just study disease, or you wouldn't just study wellness or diet and expect that you would prevent cancer or that you would help someone recover from cancer.
Right.
You really study cancer, right? And it's a whole thing is called oncology. And for suicidology, similar deal. And so he brings me to a conference, and I meet all of the suicidologists, because there are not a gazillion of us. And I learned a lot about the issue of suicide. And eventually, like, I am on the executive board now of the American Association of Suicidology. This is totally a fun thing to say. Like, and I'll say this to people on planes, like, and I'm so sorry, this is such an American way of saying it, but like, I'm a world-class suicidologist. Like, and we have at the American Association of Suicidology, we publish the Suicide and Life-Threatening Behavior, which is the journal on the topic. And we are very committed to the science, advancing our understanding of the science of suicide, and also helping people who are impacted by it. And so how I end up here with you, Mxiety, is that prior to me becoming a suicidologist, I'd also fallen in with the ranks of people who were interested in technology and media and healthcare, and how could we use that to change things. And so, of course, I went to all the suicidologists and I'm like, we should tweet.
Mm-hmm.
This was like, 2013.
Yeah.
We should tweet, because tweeting was still a thing. And we should do like good social media, and we should talk to people about this issue, because what we know and what the public knows are not the same thing.
Absolutely.
And they freaked out. Everyone freaked out.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years later, they gave me an award, and we do this.
Uh-huh. Okay, so, but
this is a lot of backstory, but this is how we get here.
That's huge. That is a big thing, because right now people are telling me that what? Like, I'm getting looks for talking about it from a non-professional perspective. Whoa. Yeah. Why? How could well, there's gatekeeping and everything, and just making sure that I'm not going to be here telling people, hey, go drink some alcohol if you're feeling suicidal, that'll help. Like, just people get nervous.
It will probably not help.
No, it definitely won't. Like, I actually would say definitely, because people are like, it helps me sometimes. I was like, I don't really want to hear that. It just won't.
Let's address that, like, right off the bat. So we are going to be talking about suicide. That's a very difficult topic. Mm-hmm. If I'm not going to be diving in after to save people. I'm not here on my clinical hours, and I don't do that. Just like a firefighter doesn't just walk down the street and run into a fire. You do that with a team and equipment. If you need crisis care while we're talking, and you don't have a treatment team that you can reach, like a 24/7 care,
we have we have a command for all of those available. So if somebody comes in,
use those resources. I'm a person that ensures that space functions like it should. I hope it goes well. But when I'm helping folks at risk for suicide, and they say, but smoking marijuana works for me, I say that's very interesting. And if you're in DBT, you don't say that that's always bad or that it's always good.
Right.
You know that. Well, you say that's a matter of facts. And so you would do a diary card, and like, we'll see how your suicidality is. And if on the days you drink, your suicidality goes down, dude, here's a jug. Or here's a joint, right on. But if in fact if you really track it while under care, and you find that those behaviors make things worse, then you should stop. And so it's really a matter of, in the care of a professional, carefully tracking that, because we know overall the research is clear that it makes things worse. It might not for you.
Right.
But the way that you would manage that was, please, under careful supervision with a provider, work on that. And that's what I would say. How about that?
How about that? I like that.
What does the audience think?
What is the audience? Well, the audience has a ton of questions already. I can't field them fast enough. So one of the questions that popped in, do you happen to have a source, or is it just your personal experience for saying that DBT with good treatment, that BPD can be treated within a year?
So totally. So dialectical behavior therapy is one of the very, very few proven methods for reducing suicide mortality rates. There's really only 3 things that we have good scientific evidence that works. And that's because Dr. Marsha Linehan and behavioral tech and Kelly Kerner, Linda Demuth, and Perry Hoffman, go to NEA BPD, go to borderlinepersonalitydisorder.com. Mm-hmm. The National Education Alliance on Borderline Personality Disorder posts a lot of these resources on their website.
Okay.
But they got all the really difficult to get NIH and NIMH grants, and they did randomized clinical trials.
Got it.
And they did gold standard research. And what they found is, if you get high fidelity dialectical behavior therapy, about 81% of the time, you're much better within 1 calendar year. And so that's what the research says. Then I would tell you, in my clinical experience, oh yeah, people who've been in a lot of pain for a long time, about 4 out of 5 of them get much better. Now, it's like any kind of healthcare treatment. It's not 100%. There are folks who don't get better. And that's, then you've got to consider other things. But I would tell you, like, people who have dialectical behavior therapy is the therapy for people who've been failed by all other therapies. Mm-hmm. Very important use of language. You cannot fail at your own therapy. I'm looking at you, weird therapists who say weird things. Patients cannot fail at therapy. You don't fail at oncology. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's ridiculous.
Right.
So dialectical behavior therapy is the therapy for people who've tried the other options, and therapy as usual, treatment as usual is not helping them. Mm-hmm. And it's a very intensive approach. It works very well. It is also hard to get because therapists who do DBT are not reimbursed at a higher rate, even though it takes more training and skill and support services to provide it. So very few people are willing to do it. And also, you're usually working with a high liability population. So high liability, no extra profit, much harder work. Mm-hmm. I've managed to put myself in situations where I could do it. But if you can find someone who'll do it, go and get it. It's wonderful.
Got it. So I have a book. I forget the author of it, but the workbook, the Dialectical Behavioral Workbook. Do you know the green one? Do you know which one I'm talking? Do you recommend it?
With the little ring thing that opens up?
It's not. It's not ring.
It's a workbook.
It's a workbook. Hold on. It's right at the top here. Hold on.
Totally. Yes. That is a great workbook.
Okay.
And I fully recommend using that. I have definitely had patients who get that and who've used it. It's a wonderful workbook. I'm usually using stuff directly from Marsha Linehan, and when she put her second edition out, I got an advanced copy, which I was excited about.
Fancy.
But like that, I happen to know that is also a very good workbook. And Marsha Linehan really did not trademark or copyright a lot of stuff when she developed it. So other people use it. It's like often the same thing. It's got good clinical evidence behind it. It's wonderful. And most of the stuff you're doing in DBT is like good for you as just a general human. Like, it's like,
yes. Well, and that's the reason. So I've done very well in regular counseling in CBT. So I bought it because people were asking me for resources, and somebody recommended this to me, and I figured that I would go through the workbook if I'm going to recommend it to people. And then that's why whenever I talk to a professional, we kind of bank our questions like this, and we make sure that, like, okay, I'm recommending this, it's the right thing to do, right? I mean, I would never recommend something.
An excellent workbook.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you right now, I've got 2 teenagers, a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old. They have great DBT skills. Neither of them have BPD. Just those DBT skills.
They're just so helpful. Yeah.
They're so good in life.
Yeah. And I've been able to cite them because people will come to me and I will say, like, hey, I'm not qualified to help you. I'm not, I never would offer. Everybody knows what the line is with me. My regulars all know. But, when they say, like, I'm in an emergency, or I want to harm myself, what do? I immediately go to the workbook because I'm not, like, I wouldn't know what to do, but the workbook has great resources for it.
There are great resources in dialectical behavior therapy for suicide and self-harm. Like, there's this whole sort of range. And of course, they do it in conjunction with, like, the Stanley and Brown's sort of standardized safety plan, which the DBT, all these folks know each other, like, literally. These
right.
Suicidologist Marsha Linehan comes to our conference. They all know each other and collaborate. And so, like, David Jobs and the Collaborative Assessment and Management of Suicidality, so CAMS therapy, he knows Marsha, she knows David Jobs, they also know Stanley and Brown and the traditional safety plan. And so if you're dealing with suicidal thoughts and feelings chronically, you want to have a good safety plan. And then for folks using DBT, like, they're wonderful tips skills. Like, have you, like, gone to the tips skills about things like temperature, intense relaxation, intense exercise, and then physical relaxation. But, like, no, those things work. They work really well. Completely recommend those for anybody who wants to, like, who's healthy enough to change their physical state very quickly. They're great.
Yeah, no, I always say, like, these workbooks, from my perspective, I make sure to say that, like, this is not instead of therapy, but unfortunately therapy is a little bit out of the question for a few people. So I'd rather you I'd rather you do this than nothing at all. And and for a lot of people, it ends up being a gateway, right? So they'll start working on
about the fact that therapy's out of reach for people, because that's like a very serious problem.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. Let's get to our questions, because that's one of them.
Mxiety, you drive. I'll follow.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So one of the ones, and you slightly touched on this, so I'm asking this one first. One of my community members asked this before stream. They put questions in the queue before the stream, and the question is, what are some ways I can derail my suicidal thoughts? And this person, by the way, I can disclose, she disclosed in chat earlier, she has BPD, she lives with BPD, so this, just to give you a background. So what are some ways I can derail suicidal thoughts, ways I can snap myself back into reality? I don't really feel like I want to die, I just want to stop the immense pain that I'm feeling.
That's like a really normal question, and folks with BPD ask it a lot. Of course, I'm not her therapist, and I would hate to give really specific therapeutic advice. But generally speaking, here are some things that we know. So number one, for folks in dialectical behavior therapy, if they have chronic suicidal feelings that come and go, there's a couple things that you're going to do. Number one, you're going to have an excellent safety plan, and you're going to go over those tips, skills, which you can find in any DBT manual. You can Google them, and that's going to be like using temperature, and I've done this. Once you do it once for practice, you never want to have to use it. And I'll have my patients practice it. You stick your face in a bowl of ice water. And the reason that works is it stimulates, I think it's called your vagal nerve, but it's like, and it makes your body kind of freak out. And we know that suicidal thoughts have a weird physiology, but it changes your physiology very quickly by very, very cold stimulation of some nerves in your face. It doesn't harm you. You're not going to drown. It'll snap you really hard out of whatever physical state you're in. You can do intensive exercise. So Marshall Linehan will talk about running up and down stairs as fast as you can until you just want to fall over and puke, because intense physical exercise changes your physical state. Talk about intense relaxation, very paced breathing, very good progressive relaxation, tensing, relaxing muscles. Some people will do things like naps, hot shower, things like that. With BPD, one of the symptoms is chronic feelings of emptiness and suicidality, right? And moods that change maybe every 2 to 6 hours, which sucks like balls, if I don't mind me saying so. If that's not
no, it's not. It's totally go for it. Yeah,
right. To not have an emotional thermostat that keeps your mood at an even keel. It's a terrible. Marshall Linehan talks about it being like being an emotional burn victim, having any feeling is has too much sensation and it hurts. And so people become suicidal, and they have, we think folks with BPD may have some unique physiology. So managing that physically is something that's really recommended. Then in addition to that, with dialectical behavior therapy, they're going to do chain link analysis. With a chain link analysis, it's going to be an intense behavioral diagram, highly detailed, of everything starting with how you were generally vulnerable, leading up to feeling suicidal, leading up to self-harming, leading up to maybe initiating a suicide attempt or going into crisis, and then looking at where you can break that chain of events and behaviors. And I know that therapy is hard to come by, but if you can get with someone who understands safety planning, chain link analysis, and tip skills, those are wonderful markers of somebody who is sufficiently trained or is likely to be trained to be able to help you with your suicidal feelings. Does that help? I know that was a detail. No,
that's amazing. You are incredible. I'm just gonna, I cannot wait to post this and just let other people watch it and rewatch it. So I'm gonna skip ahead. There's a few questions ahead of this one in line, but I feel like it's right to go with. Tale of Grief asks, what can you do to seek help when a lot of therapy seems unaffordable?
So that's really true. And that's not right. So first of all, it's a real social justice issue. And it just is really hard. So in the I don't know what country this person's in. I'm assuming the US.
Usually the US. I do have a lot of folks from the UK, a few from Norway, a few from Germany, but at this time it's usually US folks watching.
So if you're in the UK, I just got to visit the National Health Services crisis line in the UK, and you can, of course, call 111 like it's a crisis line, and we're really talking with them. I talk with the director of their clinical care, like their mental health clinical care, and they can help you get to resources. And they're just amazing, and well trained. Like, I couldn't be more impressed with the UK. If we're talking about Norway, they actually have some excellent suicidologists in Norway. Lars Mellum and his wife run the epidemiology lab in Norway. They're fabulous human beings. And I know that they are working to have good crisis resources, including in rural Norway. I think Germany very similarly, but the United States, kind of a mess.
Yeah.
So here's what I learned. I would not be here today. I would never have changed my career, changed my life, if I had gone to rural Kansas and if I had found that healthcare and mental health care was the way they told me in school that it should be. I was working at a community mental health clinic in a rural community with about 8,000 people. I was making a food stamp wage. Thank God my husband had a job. I literally would have been on food stamps otherwise, with a PhD doing very hard therapy. And I was not one of the least paid employees in that building, which is crazy. And the reason for that is simply that in the late 80s, early 90s, we just started defunding most mental health. In the 70s, our economy was better and we began to be interested in mental health. And we built this sort of network, this infrastructure of healthcare for anyone. And so you'll hear it referred to as like community mental health care, where we created catchment areas across the United States where if you live in the US, you almost certainly fall into a catchment area where you belong to someone who has received state, local, and federal money to take care of you somehow. Now, how well they take care of you
is a different
highly
issue.
Variable. Yeah. That money gets harder and harder to come by, and they've got to always do more with less until you can only do less with less.
Yeah.
But when I started practicing DBT, it was in rural community mental health care for people on sliding scale fees, for people who are Medicare, Medicaid patients, or people who didn't qualify for Medicare, Medicaid, but paid like $10 or $15 a session. You want to look and see where your community mental health catchment area is, and you want to start talking with them. Now, the chance of you getting DBT, very iffy.
Like, yeah, because it's already hard, and then you're putting in a lot of other ifs, and
But it might be, in fact, that you can get referred. They may have relationships with universities and students being trained. In some parts of the country, you really certainly can, like in the Washington State, because Marsha Linehan's at the University of Washington in Seattle. Like, there are a lot of folks who are DBT trained in the area. You can more likely get that. You can also look into telehealth or looking to see who has relationships with local universities, and see if you can access it that way. Asking for dialectical behavior therapy is a good way to start. If you have any kind of insurance, even if it is not great, you can also call your insurance company and say, give me the list of all the providers. I would start with PhD providers. They're likely, not always, there are many excellent master's level providers, and there are some real duds who have PhDs. They often have more training, and they're more likely to have this kind of training. Not always, but more likely. And in my opinion, it's like dating. You kiss all the frogs you gotta kiss until you get a prince, because you have a 10% chance of dying. And if you'd had cancer, you'd call until you got a doctor. And so you're going to do that just the same. How's that?
That's beautiful. And oh my gosh, all of these metaphors, all of these are wonderful. And I hope that people are taking them in and really, I'm eating them up and taking in all the information.
I'm here to help.
But yes. And if I can eat them up, then I can tell people this information later and say, this is what we learned when this happened, when somebody came on who was a professional. Tally Twitch asks, I have a condition that means I get a near irresistible urge to jump off if I'm at a height. Have you heard of it? And how much do you think that accounts for suicides that are not in fact deliberate but due to that condition? It's totally left field. But
I would tell you that the majority of suicides are not due to sort of irresistible urges to jump and impulse control disorders. That may be true, but I would say that would not be a really common cause. We know for folks who die by suicide, we know that they have this intense need often to escape pain. We know that when people attempt suicide, we've done studies of people who've survived near fatal suicide attempts. So
right. Yes.
really almost died and were stopped or interrupted. And the majority of the time, it is an intense and sincere desire to end pain,
Right.
not necessarily to die, but to end pain. And almost always, at some point, they're glad that they were stopped. And over 90% of the time, they're happy to go on living, and they don't attempt again, and they go on to live their lives and to recover. So we know that for many people, it's really about sort of this ambivalence about living or seeking death due to insufferable emotional pain. And if you get through what's usually a period of 30 minutes to an hour, what we know, my friend Dr. Schmitz calls it the suicide zone. It's not very long. You have to tolerate it 30 minutes to an hour. You may still have chronic depression, suicidality, anxiety, but that urge to act on it's actually relatively brief. And if it passes, you're much more likely to live.
Oh, that's great. That's great to know. That's very great. That's very useful information.
We have to tolerate it a little bit of time.
Yeah. It's kind of, I think there's solace in that, the same way that there's solace in people when people say a panic attack cannot last longer than 15 minutes. I have found a lot of people usually go, oh, I'm not dying then. Oh, okay. And usually,
I've never known a single emotion to last forever, not one.
That's also true.
They can last a few hours, but your body literally gets exhausted and will stop.
But I've heard, that I've heard from people that it's very dismissive to say, and I know when I was in pain, it was definitely dismissive. I remember my therapist saying, this is just an emotion, or this is just a feeling, and it will pass, and it hurts, but it will pass.
Feelings are biology. Something real is happening in your body, but it's just not permanent.
I don't mean it like, no. I didn't mean this like you're saying the wrong thing. No. I meant this more like, can you address that? Because I do believe in that. And now that I'm in a better place, I understand that. And I can kind of I've learned how to meditate.
Let's start with we're not Vulcans, and being all thoughts and no feeling is such a meme that they made it into a guy named Spock in the 1980s, right? Like, nobody is all thoughts and no feelings. And with borderline personality disorder, a lot of times you have like a real separation where you go from periods of like being like very heightened emotionality where the feelings are kind of all you can see and experience, to feeling very numb and dissociated from your emotions and being like hyper rational, like to the point of like not acknowledging your feelings. And so one of the things that dialectical behavior really teaches, and by the way, it's Marshall Linehan's very based in Zen Buddhism. She'll tell you she's a staunch Catholic with a lot of Zen Buddhist experience, and she'll talk about that integration.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm a yoga instructor, and so that was one of the things that I had read in DBT. That was one of the things that I had read in DBT that immediately rung a bell, which is that like, this is a passing thought, and you can let it in and then immediately let it out, and that's okay, and you can let it go. And if it lingers, acknowledge it, and and see that it's there, and then let it go. So like that is you're right, that is a very similar thing that I absolutely love.
And let's be clear about why people have feelings. Can we take this minute? Let's talk about what feelings do for you. Feelings are incredibly important. They help you understand and organize behavior much more quickly than thinking, in ways that help you survive. So like, I have 2 children. I gave birth, a bunch of things happened with oxytocin, and I looked at these horrible screaming little poop monsters, and I loved them, and I would do anything to keep them alive. And I mean anything. I remember my son was a baby. He was a little premature, and so he had like the breathing machines, whatever. We went to the grocery store, and this woman, I'll never forget her, and she moved the cart with him like out of my way to get to something, which was super rude, and I literally would have murdered her. I felt like I've never experienced murderous rage before like that, and I could have torn her limb from limb. But like, that was an emotion, right? And if something had been happening, you would want me to be able to do that, right? Our feelings of fear help us know when to run and hide. Those are important evolutionary feelings that help you survive. Feelings of anger, hostility, and aggression are extremely self-protective. They help you take action when you need to protect yourself. Feelings of love help you form kinship. Like, feelings really organize behavior. The issue with borderline PD is that it's like a thermostat that doesn't come on. Like, the feelings are kind of, they need some organization. And so then you could just numb them and be hyper analytical And thoughts don't always take you logical places or helpful places either.
Right.
And so the idea is with emotions and even suicidal feelings, which might tell you you're in a lot of pain and need to do something to get some pain relief, right? Not die, but you deserve some pain relief. That you would want it, in DBT we say feelings aren't facts. You want to look at your emotions, look at the facts, and you want to look at what your goals are and adjust your feelings to fit the facts and to fit your goals. And there's all these DBT skills that help you do that. Well, that's like pretty concrete, right? And almost anyone can do it, which I think is so amazing. Okay, I know that was a lot, but keep going.
No, everything is a lot, and it's perfect. It needs to be a lot. If it was simple, it wouldn't be interesting to listen to now, would it? So it's all good.
I'm so glad that I'm up for the hour and a half. Next question.
Next question. Have you ever had to consult on any high profile suicides?
Yes.
That's the only answer that she can give, yes or no, Bryce?
The answer is yes. And part of doing a good job at that is not really talking about it. So there are so few people who are experts about suicide who really understand the issue, who understand, like, for example, if a child dies by suicide, the number one way that a child dies by suicide in the US is by hanging, by asphyxiation. And so if a kid dies by hanging, and people may think that's weird, and then you go, well, like, that's the number one way. There have been suicides that had unusual means used. And so is that really a suicide death? Is it something else? And it turned out with the unusual means that were used, this person, I was like immediately like, that's not a person who started off American. I was right about that. And so what we needed to do to educate our staff on what we needed to do, like, it's done. For other cases that are in the media, I do have some media presence. Like, you can find me in some major news outlets, and we do talk about some of those things. So if it's like a news thing, I will comment sort of generally on the case, and you can see those you can see some of those things just like in media interviews, with the caveat that if I'm like, there was the woman who was suicidal, who was threatening sort of the Columbine area in Colorado just a few months back, and then they was found dead by suicide. And so they'll sort of ask by that, and so then I might talk about suicide being the most common motive behind murder-suicide behavior. And so I'll do some of that in the media, and then I do some high-profile, very discreet consultation. And what it is that they've got this suicide has a lot of prejudice and discrimination.
Yes.
Like, it's not just cancer. Like, and cancer didn't used to be cancer. It used to be really complicated, right? And HIV, same thing. I was a kid in the 80s when Ryan White was still alive, and people thought you got AIDS from the toilet seat. Gross. Things
have changed. Yeah.
But like now, because there's so much discrimination and people treat it so sensitively, when they want to talk with someone, they want you to be very knowledgeable, and then they also want you to be kind, and they want you to not blab. And that's how you can help. So I won't on those. Does that help?
That helps a ton. You could have just said yes or no, but you gave us a lot. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Coy. Like, I'm here to answer their questions.
Yes. Dr. Crocodile asks, and I know we kind of answered this, so just let me know if this is the simple answer, but what does a suicidologist do exactly? I believe they came in right after you answered that, but that is just somebody who studies suicidal.
Oh yeah, and we have different kinds of folks in different industries in our organization. So we have folks in the crisis care industry, which is one of the places that I'm working now. We have folks who do public health. So people at SAMHSA, people at the Center for Disease Control, CDC, like epidemiologists, people who are school psychologists running prevention programs, people who write legislation or who advocate for law. We have clinicians, we have researchers, so people who are expert in researching suicide, which is very challenging to do, and I'm very passionate about that. And of course, we also have, and many people on here may not know this, but there are people who are suicidologists because they have survived a suicide death, or they've survived their own suicide attempts.
Yes.
They become expert on the topic, and they advocate in really skillful ways using their lived expertise.
Yes.
How about that?
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I love hearing those stories just because it's somebody taking something so terrible that happened to them and turning it around and making
For
something
sure.
amazing out of it and potentially helping hundreds more people and preventing them from doing exactly what they did.
Well,
It's
and full disclosure,
amazing.
I'm also the chief medical officer for the Kevin and Margaret Hines Foundation. So many of you might have heard the story of Kevin Hines. He jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge to kill himself. He survived.
Right. Yep.
He's dedicated his life to telling a story and talking about recovery and wellness. And this is a person who's become a suicidologist, he and his wife, not because they are scientists, but because they are philanthropists and because he has lived experience. And she's a person we refer to folks who love someone who's at risk. We call that impacted family. So she she lives with someone who has chronic suicidal feelings, and how do they have a good marriage? And he advocates for resources and care for that. And so there are a lot of ways you can be a suicidologist.
Got it. Got it. You answered this one already. Okay, Tale of Grief asks, what are ways to help someone with BPD as a non-professional?
There are a lot. And so first of all, I'm going to, there's a wonderful book called Stop Walking on Eggshells that I recommend. You can get on Amazon. I think there's a real tendency with BPD, like if you love and care about someone who doesn't have an emotional thermostat, because that's really what BPD is. You don't have an emotional thermostat and you can't regulate, right? And so there's a real tendency to want to take on that role, and you can't do it. It won't work, right? It's like standing around with like a heater and a fan and a bunch of ice cubes and like switching all, like, you just make yourself crazy. And so it's learning how to like sort of pull back from trying to regulate people's mood for them and support them while they do it. The National Educational Alliance on Borderline Personality Disorder, not a member, but Perry Hoffman and the people around that are fabulous. Fully recommend that you reach out. They do wonderful family and loved ones sort of groups. There's a Twitter chat called BPD Chat on Sunday afternoons.
Oh my gosh, really?
Oh, totally. It's great. My dear friend Carl Dunn runs that. They've been running for years. And Carl also is the father of someone with BPD and has a lot of very practical advice and is connected with NEA BPD and can help you find, support groups for family members. I just cannot recommend that enough. NAMI, the National Alliance, against mental illness, they have like a family and loved ones also sort of group or like set of classes, and I really recommend that. And you can learn how to be like pretty healthy and care about somebody who also still may have mental illness, because it's just so common. And the chances are you're going to love them anyway. So like you might become really skillful at that, and then everybody benefits, right?
That's fantastic. All right. I hope you guys were making note of that. I'm going to try to clip that and we'll see if that clip works. But that's really important. I especially love, I didn't know this considering we were on SPSM chat. You would think that I would know about BPD chat. That's great because that's easy access to, I'm assuming, professionals who are talking about this. That's
totally
amazing.
They have access to the best professionals. NEA BPD are literally the best professionals in DBT and BPD. Like the people who understand it, have done the controls trials, who invented the therapy. They're just the best group of folk.
Yeah. BPD, borderline personality disorder. Yes. I just want to make sure that, because sometimes
not bipolar, although that is a very serious risk factor. Bipolar disorders are largely genetically based. They're very rare, and it's like type 1 diabetes. It's really biological. It's going to get worse as you age. Your goal is to sort of control it and keep it stable as long as possible and keep yourself healthy. Borderline personality disorder, and by the way, you can have both things. Not very common, but you can have both things. Borderline personality disorder, you can recover and not have the disorder anymore, which is like type 2 diabetes. So like that's a good way to think of it. Even though there's more stigma with borderline PD, it is a recoverable disorder. Bipolar, not so much.
Interesting.
You're going to pick one. Pick borderline.
Yeah, just pick one. Okay. Just pick one out of a hat. Dr. Crocodile, we have commands for that. Exclamation SPUS, exclamation SP International, exclamation resources, and exclamation help will all Pick your word, and it will probably get you to suicide prevention. Yes, Dr. Crocodile, so don't worry. But Isa asks, would feelings apply similarly in the same way with survival in a society? So I guess this is going back to our feelings conversation, meaning like, are feelings really helpful for survival?
Oh, absolutely. Emotions organize behavior and they absolutely help you survive. So because I have worked for many years with the veteran population, and because when I'm doing BPD work, I'm almost always working with someone who survived terrible trauma. And so a lot of times when you experience horrible trauma, you get something called post-traumatic growth. The majority of the time, in fact, even though something very bad is happening to you, we have all these emotions that help you survive it. And often, even though you would never want to grow by having something horrible happen to you.
Of course.
That's the most common outcome. But a certain percentage of the time, about 1 out of every 5 or so cases where you have a really bad trauma, your limbic system sort of gets damaged by it. So your limbic system does a lot of emotional regulations, and it regulates what are called the 4 F's: feeding, fleeing, fighting, and mating. These are highly important survival things, like to run or fight, to eat and digest, and to make more babies, right? These are evolutionarily very important, and they're very powerful, and they're very emotional. And when you experience trauma, often you're experiencing that fear reaction or that fight or flight reaction, and it's like blowing the wires in the house, like an intense electrical overload, and you will have damage to your limbic system. And that's really what post-traumatic stress disorder is. And it's a disorder.
I lived with PTSD, and yeah. I'm one of the few people who's had the chance to say that I've recovered, actually. But
really hard.
Yes, yeah. I lived with the diagnosis. I think I officially became not qualifying for the diagnosis 3 years ago, but I lived with it I lived with the diagnosis for 6. So
I could just hug you
and then,
if you wanted a hug.
I would love your hug, April. It would be the best hug ever. Yeah. Yeah.
It's really hard. It's one of the only disorders that we really know what causes it for sure. And that's what we know. And those emotions often will help you survive a trauma. Very occasionally, and this is totally genetically based. You're one of those people. And by the way, I would be at risk for that, knowing my family genetics like I do. Where
Interesting.
It's just not great for your limbic system.
Yeah.
And your limbic system is not as hardy as someone else's, and you're just at risk. And I'm so glad to hear it's very hard to recover. You have to be pretty dedicated.
It wasn't just dedication. I also think it was, I mean, there's a lot of work into it, right? Which is the dedication part. But I also remember having a conversation with my husband where like I realized how memories are supposed to be, and how like mine just did not function that way. Like I would describe to him whenever I asked him, it like occurred to me to ask him, I was like, how do you experience a memory? And he goes, well, I just think about the moment, and I like, then I feel a pleasant emotion related to that moment. And I was like, oh, okay, because I literally relive that moment. I go in there and I feel all the feelings and I walk through it, and it's not like I can't separate that moment then from reality. And that was happening with both positive and negative. And the reason that I cite that is because I think that was the moment where something like really clicked, where I was able to finally understand like, it's just that I don't put memories away like I've trained my brain, or my brain has trained me to put memories in a weird way, store them. But if I just kind of watch them as an observer, I might have an easier time. And I feel like there was a lot of years preceding that, obviously, of recovery, but that was one of those like really big puzzle pieces that once it fit in, a lot of things started making sense. And I cite this a lot because I remember my last flashback, it was at Christmas in 2017. And that was the last time I had a flashback that I can remember. And I feel very, very fortunate.
Thank you for sharing that.
I like hijacked everything. I was like, tell me my story.
People need to understand that mental illness is real, but also recovery is real.
That's right.
Keep asking questions, but that is really awesome.
That's exactly it. Yes, I'm just happy you said it. Yeah. Mike, okay, questions. So we ran out of audience questions, which is blowing my mind. And then maybe,
listen,
yeah,
I'm sorry. I'll try to be more interesting, audience.
No, I think you're just doing such a fantastic job and answering them so thoroughly that
Sure.
potentially follow-up questions are not necessarily needed. Yeah. How do you feel about online therapy? Are there any legitimate websites that you maybe recommend or that offer it? Asked Tale of Grief.
So, teletherapy happens a lot of ways, and I'm of course very interested in that because there just really are never going to be enough therapists. When we look at people just at high risk for suicide, that's 8 to 9 million American adults a year. If I provided evidence-based therapy for 8 to 9 million American adults, I would have to train and employ 1/3 of the working US population doing nothing but suicide care. Like
Wow.
that would be no other kind of mental health care. We know that just simply the way that mental health care is designed, it's really hard to get to therapists, and they're probably just never going to be enough to go around. And that's why 80% of mental health care is provided by general practitioners in the form of very basic anti-anxiety and antidepressant prescriptions without a lot of therapy. When it comes to online therapy, that's probably going to help us solve a lot of problems. You have areas with high density of therapists, like say parts of California, and then you have like places like rural Kansas, where you have the one licensed psychologist and like 2 or 3 master's level practitioners for thousands of people and hundreds of miles. There are a couple of problems in the US with that. One of the problems is that right now, the way that we do licensure, the way we regulate our field is it's on a state by state basis. And you can't provide online therapy across state lines in states where you don't have a license. And it's kind of a mess. Now, I work in the federal space. And so so I have a license in one state, but I work for the federal government at Veterans Affairs, once again, not speaking on their behalf, but I can provide therapy sort of as long as I'm on like federal property or working with someone in our system, even by the phone, I can kind of provide therapy anywhere. I have credentials to do telehealth and have done telehealth where I'm doing risk assessments for someone in another clinic somewhere. And I've been beamed in because they, it's a rural clinic and they needed someone. And I think that's great. For online platforms, I know people talk about Talkspace enough. I've not used it. 7 Cups of Tea often has peer support online. And I have not used the platform recently, but Kate Niederhofer and Glenn Moriarty are colleagues of mine. And I love products like that. I think that eventually, just like in the federal space, we're looking at like, what do we need to do to make the laws fit the mission instead of making the work fit the laws? Like how do we need to change the way that we regulate healthcare so that we can do more therapy? So a licensed therapist in California can just provide, in Montana is one of the highest suicide rates in the country. Like we have more therapists in some places. Like how do we get someone there, or Alaska, for example, or, can someone who's well-trained in another country practice in our system? And how would you do that? We need to just start thinking about efficient use of resources. And I think digital platforms can do that. The problem is not the technology, and the problem is a little bit that you don't have enough therapists, not at all the technology, and a lot that the regulation was designed before this kind of technology existed. How's that?
That's awesome. But I think most people have beef with it in different ways. I mean, because I understand the whole licensure across states thing, but I think people mostly have trouble with it in the sense of like, am I getting good enough help? And then, of course they can't help somebody across.
People get bad help face to face all the time.
That's a very, very good point, and that's the answer I'm going to use from now on. I personally did not have the best experience with BetterHelp, but it was personally because they just I believe that I was being charged way too much.
And I'm going to tell you, people get charged too much. People get non-evidence-based care. When you're doing therapy, even face-to-face, you just get paid. That person gets paid for 50 minutes with you as long as they know how to write the note right. You're not necessarily getting evidence-based care. You're not necessarily getting a person who's an effective therapist. And I've seen a lot of bad therapy. I would tell you that it's just hard to get good therapy, period. And however you find it, I'm happy for you. When I have had to move on from clinics, I always made sure that everyone on my caseload was well situated. Like I didn't just be like, you assign them, peace out. And that meant sometimes we had to do a lot of searching. Or when one of my patients moved, we had to do a lot of searching. And I would help patients go through some therapists that, in my opinion, were not adequate for my clients' needs. It's not easy out there, whether you do it online or face to face. And that's a real, that's not, if you're the patient, that's not your fault. That's my profession's fault, right? Anyway, keep going.
No, these are, give it a moment to sink in. These are wonderful. I'm also making note of the next question because we just had another one come in. Tally Twitch asks, if you had unlimited funds, what system would you set up?
Really? I love it when people ask me this question. I got asked this question once after a professional dinner, and I was a little bit tipsy because it's Louisiana, and I was Louisiana sober. And I was like, let me tell you what I'd do. So, and I have done this in clinics, and I would pay to have it well done. Number one, I work with a lot of data scientists, and I have used very basic SMS-based or text-based technology tools that can track mood. And we also can design apps that work on your phone and would monitor your suicide risk and well-being, or like through your language and everything. And we can actually do that fairly accurately, and more accurately than clinicians, by the way, who are very bad at it. And the accuracy is getting better all the time for what the computers would do. So I would, number one, pay my very fancy technology friends a couple $1 million to get this stuff made for my clinic, for anyone that I'm
right.
And I would get a couple people working on a team, no slouches, because you don't want to do this work alone. And then I would, there's a wonderful in a private facility called Austin Riggs in the Berkshires here in Massachusetts, which I've been to. And they only take 100 patients a year. I think it's like $20,000 a month to start to get in. And you've got like 24/7 art studio with 24/7 art therapy appointments. There's a chef in the cafeterias, and boy, like it's really good for you. But I would start with, although that's all wonderful, I would start with 24/7 monitoring of your well-being using the best digital tools. And then I would have a small enough caseload and a small team. So you've got really high frequency access to your providers at the moment when you're having problems. Because I think that's really when, like with DBT, it was the coaching calls where people get much better. In order to do that, you have to have enough money.
Yes.
And I think that the technology tools would also sort of further refine that. And if you have a small enough on-call team that you could get that done. So if I had enough money and I could do any kind of care I wanted, I would do that. And I would be happy all my days.
Got it.
And then we would make great science happen with all your data.
Yes. Science. Doc Foreman, you would not create a dependency on the therapist, though. Well, I promise you not. So when you do dialectical behavior therapy, it's a 6-month course, and the first 6 months, it usually do 2 6-month courses. And the first 6 months, you're kind of learning the skills, and I always say by month 2, you hate my guts. Because I'm the meanest, toughest therapist you'll ever meet, and I'm really. I love it. That's what I needed, because I went to a therapist who was there to validate me and validate my emotions, and I got bored very quickly. For some people that's needed, totally, but I got bored very quickly, and I ended up being transferred over very politely, and I've been with this therapist since, and now it's been 2013 and we're in 2019, so that's been 6 years, and she's the one who got me through PTSD and through my worst depression and suicidal moments, and yeah.
So month 2 to about month 6, you're gonna hate me, and they all do. And I always tell them that, like, they come in and I'm like, first of all, I don't have to take just any patient, because I never have. Like, this is like, I'm the only take the folks who really, really need me, and only if you're really, really committed. But if you commit, you get the red carpet.
I love it.
You get the red carpet, and there's a period where you just hate me, and things are really hard, but you're very high risk for suicide. So I'm going to work really hard. I believe that you could die. So you get that kind of care and attention. That second 6 months, you really nail your skills. And I promise you, and here's the thing I always tell my patients, as much as I love you, once your behaviors aren't as exciting, you're not as fun for me anymore.
You're not a puzzle. The puzzle's solved.
And they'll be like, and so usually what will happen is this person who, that high frequency coaching really is only a few months. You really need it, like right when you're having the problem.
Yeah.
It's like when you're learning basketball, or whatever, you have to just have somebody watch you do layups and help you correct your form until you can do a layup right. But like once somebody's kind of got it licked, I'm like, good. Like, I'm like, listen,
yeah.
Now that you just have a little garden variety depression and anxiety, we're going to find you another therapist.
Garden variety.
Almost always.
Right.
Because I'm like, listen, and they're also kind of like, dude, doc, I have a life. I can't talk to you this much anymore. Damn. And you're really going for that inside of a year. So usually about month 9, they're like, I don't need to be here all the time. I have stuff to do. And you're like, I know. And you're kind of boring.
You're like, yeah, all right. So it's feelings mutual.
And that's how it usually goes with me, really, really consistently.
So we have about 15 more minutes left of your time, which you have been very, very generous. I know, we're having so much fun, which is why I have closed the queue, everybody. I'm so sorry. I've closed the queue. Okay, and so we have four questions left, and let's see if we can get through them. Absolutely. Tale of Grief, I'm so sorry. Yes. Okay. So Bucket List asks, what are your thoughts on people who try to cure their suicidal tendencies through being alone in nature? I climb mountains to try to get over my mental thoughts, but sometimes I feel like I'm actually making it worse, in the sense that I'm pushing myself further away from humanity and anyone who'd be able to help me. Hard to understand if I'm making a positive effect or if I'm ultimately digging the hole deeper and separating myself from my
measure it. That's my thoughts.
Yes.
Get a diary card, get a DBT diary card and measure it and find out.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do a little science on yourself. You're going to have to measure yourself, and then you're going to treat it a bit like an experiment. Not everybody responds the same to all kinds of things. And so what you're trying to find is the right mix of things that make you happy. I don't know if you've noticed, Mxiety, I'm a little extroverted.
A little bit. I've never met an extroverted person that I didn't like, so we're good.
So when I'm by myself too much, I go cuckoo bananas.
Right. Same.
I tried being a stay-at-home mom for about 2 years. I was a basket case.
2 years? That's impressive. I don't know that I would have lasted 2 years.
That's how I became a yoga teacher. I had to leave the house. My husband and the yoga teacher at my gym like conspired because they're like, she needs even a small job, because I was like crazy. But for some people, it's a great life, right? So like my sister, like everyone in my family are introverts literally but me, and they like live in a farm in a small community and they all get along. And I get along great. I just get bored. So you've got to, if you're going alone in nature and it helps, but only if you do it so much, or you think you're helping, but you find that you get worse, do it differently. If it's but you just have to measure it. And that's why I was talking about all those digital tools, like helping people measure what works for them is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Next question.
I use, and I recommend, they don't sponsor me in any way, shape, or form, but I use Dailyo, and I love it because it helps me. Yes, it's so fantastic. And it literally helps you measure whatever you need it to measure. You can tell it what you're looking for every day, and then you mark those things every day, whether or not they happened, right? So for me, I was measuring what my coping skills were. Like, I was trying to narrow down my toolbox. So I was putting in stuff that I did every day and then seeing what my mood was like. So then that correlated, and I was able to see, okay, when I'm having a great day, it's because I walked the dog, I read, I watched TV, and it's not that all those things are possible to do every day, and when I'm feeling down, I can go, but I have a list to start with if I'm feeling down and I have time and resources, and yes.
And I will tell you, a couple of times when I ran DBT group, because I back when I started, it was paper diary cards. There are several apps, and I am always using technology tools with my patients. I really love doing that. And can I tell you, when you find the things, so if you like Dailyo, and I hope that folks on this thread will put their recommendations and share.
Yes.
Like when you road test it and you find the app or thing, like people find the one that works for them. And I see pay ones, free ones. Like the light goes off and they're like, oh, I got to do X. And you're like, there we go.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Oh, for
and
sure.
It was great because, so I now only see my therapist once a month, and I will show her, because what would happen is I would say, I don't know what kind of month I have. It was kind of bad, kind of good. But now I have literally a graph that goes, this is the color my month was this month. Yeah, it's
and
neat.
I used mood247.com, like with patients to like text a mood rating and make a graph. And then they would come in and that was one of the ways I ran my clinic. Before I asked, like, instead of having somebody try to remember back to their month, because people with mood disorders don't remember things accurately. They don't remember their mood or their functioning accurately. You pull up the graph, and then like, there you go. And so what would happen is in my experience, they got better a lot faster, just because like, and I didn't waste 20 minutes finding out about their month.
Yes.
I saw it took 5 minutes. I'm not saying it's a waste of time. It's just I only spent 5 minutes finding out about their month. And I spent 50 minutes doing something with it.
Yes.
So I fully recommend that. If Delio works, like whatever apps work for you guys, like share with me. I want to hear.
Yeah. You guys please do share if you guys have any others that work well with that will work well for you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, it also helps. The thing that I also heard, and this is the last thing, I'm not going to harp on this point, but the thing that I also heard was it just helps you set in perspective. Did I really have a bad day, or did I think I had a bad day? Did my day end bad, and so I wrote the whole thing off, or did it start poorly and I wrote the whole thing off, or really it wasn't a bad day and that's the end of the story? And
I am trained to do cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, and I've provided that therapy. But before they let you, like good supervision, before you do it, you do some of the techniques to yourself. By the way, is the meanest therapy I've ever done to people.
Really? I loved cognitive. I didn't think it was that mean at all.
Did you have a sleep restriction? Because that sucks ass.
Oh, and you mean that you can't like take a nap during the day?
And they only give you 80% of your sleep time to sleep in, so that you're hungry for sleep and you fall right asleep and you have to get out of bed. And
I didn't do CBT specifically for insomnia, so I can't say that I did, but that's interesting.
But you do the diary card about all your sleep and eating and everything else. Man, I did that for 2 weeks, and I learned things about myself that I use to this day. And so I don't think you have to do it forever, but when you're trying to troubleshoot it.
Yes. Well, I love that. When you're trying to it's like, troubleshooting a machine. Have you tried unplugging and replugging it back in? Yeah. What recommendations would you give to someone who has to switch therapists to make the first session feel productive rather than rereading? Sorry, I want to make sure that I get it.
Yeah,
rather than rereading a book.
Transfer therapists, right?
Yes.
So number one, I would not just like leave one therapist session one, head to another therapist session two. Whenever possible, you want to do kind of handoff. So you want to like sort of interview them and make sure they're like before you go. And if you can like get a session with both therapists, it's ideal. It's hard to arrange, but where there's kind of a handoff and where there's a little bit of a review, like this is what happened and this is what we did.
That's usually not what happens, right? There's usually, that's
people walking cold and they hate doing it.
Yeah.
I would say like to the extent that you can, like ask your therapist to do their homework.
Yeah. Okay.
And then like come and with dialectical behavior therapy, you always come in with an agenda, like you set an agenda for your time together. And I have to say that works very, very well. And so if you can get a therapist, my IT person's back to check. It must be our time because he's going to check and make sure.
Oh my gosh! I'm so sorry.
Thank you,
IT
the board
person.
chair of the American Association of Suicidology and my IT support.
Oh my goodness! We have a guest at the end of the show. Oh my gosh!
Two suicidologists. So what are our final questions?
Oh my gosh. Do you have any advice for dealing with bad care? I had someone to tell me your personality is a pain. When I was younger seeking treatment for BPD, I left mid-appointment and lodged a complaint.
Here's what I would say, which is a patient can't fail at their own therapy, and F you. I mean, don't say that like unless that serves your goals. Mm-hmm. So number one, what's your goal? So if your goal is like this person's not appropriate for you, like you should just move on, like, and you should do that in a way that gets you to someone who can help you as fast as possible. When appropriate, lodge complaints, absolutely, but like think about what your goals are. With DBT, there's a wonderful wonderful skill called FAST, which is about standing up with yourself. Fair, no apologies, stick to the truth, right? And so you're just like, in all fairness, I can't fail at my own therapy. If you don't like me, then that's on you. That's a therapist interfering behavior, not a patient interfering behavior. I'm doing my best, but maybe your training does not fit my needs. And maybe we need to find someone who's trained to help me the way that I am.
There.
Because you can't bring anybody but yourself to therapy, can you?
Yeah. Mooble asks, how can we ensure true privacy? For example, an app like Wobot used Facebook Messenger for a while, and then it turned. You know about Wobot? I actually am a huge fan, other than the whole Facebook thing. But then it turned out it really wasn't private.
No, and so here's the deal: none of it is, and you've got to be cool with that. So, and some of the stuff we're going to be talking about tomorrow about like social media and things like that. So, number one, like privacy isn't a real thing. So if you're interacting digitally, all of that's leaving a breadcrumb trail. Now, the question is who wants your data and what are they going to do with it? And of course, Wobot and some of those other ones, like if Facebook has your data, like Facebook's going to decide what they're going to do with it. They do have a suicide prevention arm. They also have a bunch of other stuff. You can also donate your data. So like, let's say ourdatahelps.org, donate today. If you've attempted suicide and survived, your data could help scientists, and your Facebook data, your Twitter data, your Instagram, your Fitbit data, ourdatahelps.org. Please donate your data. So like, it's not going to be private. The question is who you have to be thinking through. Who do you want to know about what's happening with your mental health and who do you not? Any kind of digital behavior that you engage with is leaving a signal. And if you have suicide risk, it may be leaving a relatively loud signal. But there are a whole lot of people who probably won't be looking. And so with all interactions, there's this trade-off. There's no 100% information security. Like there's a quote, like I could take something, stick it in a vault, bury it in cement, stick it in a room with armed guards, and even then I couldn't be certain that something is secure. What you want is it to just be secure enough for your needs. And if I'm the president of the United States, there are hackers who are coming for me, but little old April Foreman, probably not. And so you just have to kind of think about what your security and privacy needs are and design your life accordingly. How about that?
How about that? That is your last question from the audience. Bada bing. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Come see me on the AMA. If we didn't answer your questions, like come to Reddit.
There you go. There you go. That you said that's on the 10th?
That is on the 10th. And Tony Wood, world-class suicidologist, will be there, and Dr. Bart Andrews. And so we will have 3 suicidologists taking all questions on Reddit on World Suicide Prevention Day.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
That is valuable, not just people who have suicide experience.
We could use neurotypicals data too.
We can use anybody. The data set needs to be larger so that data scientists can do research on it.
And we've already got multiple scientific studies published with that. Your data only goes to scientists, nonprofit, blah, blah, blah. Go read it. We have a nice informed consent designed by suicide attempt survivors and loss survivors. So please do go check it out.
Oh my.
Accredited U.S. universities.
Yay! Oh my gosh. You guys are absolutely mind-blowingly incredible. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Okay, people are asking, like, one of the questions was like, here's the last question.
Sure.
Are you coming back? Can we have you back?
Listen, I love everyone on Twitch. This is where I want to be. So like, I'll come anywhere that they'll have me. I'm happy to answer questions. People who care about this issue as much as me are a delight to engage with.
Oh my God. You don't know how much of a delight you are. Thank you. So this is, you guys, Suicide Awareness Month. So this is an awesome way that I believe that we are kicking it off. Thank you. I can't thank you enough, Dr. Foreman. Like, I just can't thank you enough. You were absolutely incredible, and you answered every question down to a T, and I absolutely adored you before through our, like, limited social media interaction, and now, like, you're absolutely blowing my mind. Thank you so much for the time that we've spent together.
Thank you for what you're doing for the community by hosting this. You guys, thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.